This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Alarms and Discursions by G. K. Chesterton. Section 5, Chapters 13 through 15. A Criminal Head. When men of science, or more often men who talk about science, speak of studying history or human society scientifically, they always forget that there are two quite distinct questions involved. It may be that certain facts of the body go with certain facts of the soul, but it by no means follows that a grasp of such facts of the body goes with a grasp of the things of the soul. A man may show very learnedly that certain mixtures of race make a happy community, but he may be quite wrong (he generally is) about what communities are happy. A man may explain scientifically how a certain physical type involves a really bad man, but he may be quite wrong (he generally is) about which sort of man is really bad. Thus his whole argument is useless, for he understands only one half of the equation. The drearier kind of Don may come to me and say, "Celts are unsuccessful. Look at Irishmen, for instance." To which I should reply, "You may know all about Celts, but it is obvious that you know nothing about Irishmen. The Irish are not in the least unsuccessful, unless it is unsuccessful to wander from their own country over a great part of the earth, in which case the English are unsuccessful too." A man with a bumpy head may say to me, as a kind of New Year greeting, "Fools have microcephalous skulls," or what not. To which I shall reply, in order to be certain of that, you must be a good judge both of the physical and of the mental fact. It is not enough that you should know a microcephalous skull when you see it. It is also necessary that you should know a fool when you see him, and I have a suspicion that you do not know a fool when you see him, even after the most lifelong and intimate of all forms of acquaintanceship. The trouble with most sociologists, criminologists, etc., is that while their knowledge of their own detail is exhaustive and subtle, their knowledge of man and society, to which these are to be applied, is quite exceptionally superficial and silly. They know everything about biology, but almost nothing about life. Their ideas of history, for instance, are simply cheap and uneducated. Thus some famous and foolish professor measured the skull of Charlotte Corday to ascertain the criminal type. He had not historical knowledge enough to know that if there is any criminal type, certainly Charlotte Corday had not got it. The skull, I believe afterwards, turned out not to be Charlotte Corday's at all, but that is another story. The point is that the poor old man was trying to match Charlotte Corday's mind with her skull without knowing anything whatever about her mind. But I came yesterday upon yet more crude and startling example. In a popular magazine there is one of the usual articles about criminology, about whether wicked men could be made good if their heads were taken to pieces. As by far the wickedest men I know are much too rich and powerful ever to submit to the process, the speculation leaves me cold. I always notice with pain, however, a curious absence of the portraits of living millionaires from such galleries of awful examples. Most of the portraits in which we are called upon to remark the line of the nose or the curve of the forehead appear to be the portraits of ordinary sad men, who stole because they were hungry or killed because they were in a rage. The physical peculiarity seems to vary infinitely. Sometimes it is the remarkable square head. Sometimes it is the unmistakable round head. Sometimes the learned draw attention to the abnormal development, sometimes to the striking deficiency of the back of the head. I have tried to discover what is the invariable factor, the one permanent mark of the scientific criminal type. After exhaustive classification, I have come to the conclusion that it consists in being poor. But it was among the pictures in this article that I received the final shock, the enlightenment which has left me in lasting possession of the fact that criminologists are generally more ignorant than criminals. Among the starved and bitter but quite human faces was one head, neat but old-fashioned, with the powder of the 18th century and a certain almost prim pertness in the dress which marked the conventions of the upper middle class about 1790. The face was lean and lifted stiffly up, the eyes stared forward with a frightful sincerity, the lip was firm with heroic firmness, all the more pathetic because of its force. Without knowing who it was, one could have guessed that it was a man in the manner of Shakespeare's Brutus, a man of piercingly pure intentions, prone to use government as a mere machine for morality, very sensitive to the charge of inconsistency, and a little too proud of his own clean, honourable life. I say I should have known this almost from the face alone, if I had not known who it was. But I did know who it was. It was Robespierre. And underneath the portrait of this pale and too eager moralist were written these remarkable words: "Deficiency of ethical instincts," followed by something to the effect that he knew no mercy, which is certainly untrue, and by some nonsense about a retreating forehead, a peculiarity which he shared with Louis XVI and with half the people of his time and ours. Then it was that I measured the staggering distance between the knowledge and the ignorance of science. Then I knew that all criminology might be worse than worthless, because of its utter ignorance of that human material of which it is supposed to be speaking. The man who could say that Robespierre was deficient in ethical instincts is a man utterly to be disregarded in all calculations of ethics. He might as well say that John Bunyan was deficient in ethical instincts. You may say that Robespierre was morbid and unbalanced, and you may say the same of Bunyan. But if these two men were morbid and unbalanced, they were morbid and unbalanced by feeling too much about morality, not by feeling too little. You may say, if you like, that Robespierre was, in a negative sort of way, mad. But if he was mad, he was mad on ethics. He had a company of keen and pugnacious men, intellectually impatient of unreason and wrong, resolved that Europe should not be choked up in every channel by oligarchies and state secrets that already stank. The work was the greatest that was ever given to men to do, except that which Christianity did, in dragging Europe out of the abyss of barbarism after the Dark Ages. But they did it, and no one else could have done it. Certainly we could not do it. We're not ready to fight all Europe on a point of justice. We're not ready to fling our most powerful class as mere refuse to the foreigner. We're not ready to shatter the great states at a stroke. We're not ready to trust ourselves in an awful moment of utter dissolution in order to make all things seem intelligible and all men feel honourable henceforth. We are not strong enough to be as strong as Danton. We are not strong enough to be as weak as Robespierre. There is only one thing, it seems, that we can do. Like a mob of children, we can play games upon this ancient battlefield. We can pull up the bones and skulls of the tyrants and martyrs of that unimaginable war, and we can chatter to each other childlessly and innocently about skulls that are imbecile and heads that are criminal. I do not know whose heads are criminal, but I think I know whose are imbecile. The Wrath of the Roses. The position of the rose among flowers is like that of the dog among animals. It is so much that both are domesticated as that have some dim feeling that they were always domesticated. There are wild roses and there are wild dogs. I do not know the wild dogs. Wild roses are very nice. But nobody ever thinks of either of them if the name is abruptly mentioned in a gossip or a poem. On the other hand, there